Now, this is a definition, actually, that for as long as I've worked with John Hegarty, it's sat on his office wall, and it says, an idea is a thought or plan formed by mental effort. Not entirely helpful, but I think he uses it to encourage his team to work a little bit harder. Obviously quite an intimidating subject. None of us have felt entirely confident with it. I thought I would maybe narrow the subject slightly and talk about communication ideas. I'm an old grey-haired ad man in the twilight of my career, but maybe my past can help your future. And I thought that maybe an interesting way of talking about it would be, I rather like the fact that Martin Scorsese, when asked to do the history of American cinema, says, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I can definitively talk about the history of American cinema. So I'll give you my personal journey, and I'll just give you my personal journey through communication ideas over the last long time. So I grew up in the 70s. I think ideas in the 70s, communication ideas in the 70s. And, I think as we go through this, I think it's interesting to track whether any of these ideas are useful to us now. Ideas in the 70s were, it was the era of the jingle, of the visual motif. We had the, the Andrex puppy, let your fingers do the walking for Yellow Pages, etc., etc. And I'd say that in that era, the idea was, in a sense, a repeated dramatic motif. What you sought to do as a communication agency was to develop one of these little things and drill it into the back of people's crania, because, of course, we lived in the era of passively consumed advertising, where people didn't have any choice. I come from a large family, and I grew up in the era before the remote control, and I often think that my father had so many children so that we could change the channel more often. So when I worked for much of the 90s on the Levi's campaign, and I think we felt we were taking sort of advertising ideas beyond these kind of jingles and motifs, etc. And I guess we were dealing in ideas as narrative. You constructed narratives at the centre of which was the brand, and you started beginning, middle and end. You had a heroic user personification and stuff like that. Everything was constructed as a narrative. And subsequently, I worked on the Lynx campaign, and in many ways that was a jokey version of the same thing. It was a narrative, problem, solution, brand in the middle, causing the benefit, so all that kind of thing. And you still see a lot of this today. I remember even then I felt aware that we were defining our ideas around a particular medium. It was very much TV was driving how we defined ideas. So we did narrative because that was the lead medium. And when we did print, it's more difficult to do stories in print. I mean, I actually dislike print advertising that is just narrative advertising, because it doesn't, I don't think it communicates very well. And you notice that a lot of the print advertising we developed in that period wasn't narrative. It was more sort of idea as joke, essentially, some kind of juxtaposition of it's creamy, this is another form of cream, etc. So I think, at the same time we were doing narrative and joke. I think also when we talked about our own Levi's campaign, we noticed that it wasn't just the narrative that was interesting about it. It was the fact that we were consistently, over and over again, using a similar world, creating a world, if you like. And, the 50s, hero, walking quietly through the street, very Clint Eastwood, etc., etc. And we thought that must be part of its success. When we worked subsequently on Olivio, there was a message and a narrative in there, but also a lot of it was to do with the creation of a sunny, warm, Mediterranean, healthy world. And so I think there's another aspect of the ideas that we had in those days, which wasn't just narrative or joke, but which was creation of a visual and understandable and ownable world. So the idea as brand world. Even then, and I think in a way in the course of my advertising career, there's always been the ideas that didn't seem to fit any of our understanding of ideas. We were always uncomfortable with the world of perfume and fragrance and so forth. One of my favourite ads at that time was Egoist, where a bunch of women open the doors and just shout Egoist. And we loved it, but we didn't know why it was good. And we couldn't imagine ourselves creating it. And occasionally, because we worked on Levi's, we used to get the opportunity to work on a fragrancy thing or an upmarket prestige thing. And we weren't very good because we always tried to put a story in it. And I think some of these, I like the fact that even at our most confident, we were uncomfortable because we knew there were other ways of doing things. We were troubled when we saw Gap, because Gap was so elegant and beautiful and yet empty. It didn't have what we called an idea. There was no story, but it elegantly demonstrated the product and it had a feel, etc. And so I was always looking for a definition of idea that would encompass the thing that I like. And narrative and joke and world didn't really fit Gap. And indeed, we started mimicking this a little bit when we occasionally on Axe would make ideas that didn't have an idea. With Axe Pulse, it was a dance. It wasn't a narrative, and there wasn't an imposed sort of brand moment. It was just a dance, and the couple danced together. So I don't know what kind of idea that is, but it was an idea as an impression. Inevitably, we've all, if you want to make something important, call it big, as we now know with data, etc. But you know, in those days, we suddenly said it's not just an idea; it's a big idea. Now, you know, much criticised the concept of the big idea, but the big idea had a real thing to it. It was a growing awareness of the multiplicity of channels and usages to which you wanted to put communication to, and it wasn't just telly; it was the activation, it was the print, you know, etc., etc. And you said, I need a coherent thought that will hold all this together and will also direct future action. So the much maligned big idea, I think, was a real response to a genuine need around fragmentation and around action, as you've been indicating. I think, you know, inevitably, because you're looking for a big idea, you go higher. When you go higher, you become a little bit more pomp rock, and it becomes a little bit more prone to the Icarus effect, as I call it. But there they all are. You know, they're all fantastic, and they're all beautifully glued together, and you can work across platforms and geographies, and et cetera, et cetera. But even then, we were developing the big idea on Vodafone, which was now. It was all about the immediacy of communication rather than demolishing distance. It was about the immediacy of being able to do things, et cetera, et cetera. And we said it's all about now. And the client said, I know it's about now, but I think it might be about red. And they pointed to orange and O2, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we were troubled by things that didn't fit our scheme. They didn't fit our understanding of the big idea. And of course, one of the many great things about O2 is bubbles, and about orange is orange. And I think I learned to understand at that point that I need an understanding of ideas that accommodates visual equity as much as conceptual equity. You know, stuff like Apple, which it has its own aesthetic rather than having some kind of conceptual glue. So the idea as visual equity. And indeed, around about this time, I was really proud that we worked on Audi, and the main thing we did on Audi was they had a kind of, you know, an amazingly successful campaign, but it was beginning to feel outdated. And the clients felt this too. And we didn't really know how to move it on. We'd always done these prestigious black cars out of black. And the big, but we'd always done Wolfsburg Dirt Technique too. And we didn't want to lose Wolfsburg Dirt Technique. And the most significant thing that we did, I think, around about that time was we said, well, why don't we make it white cars out of white? And we carried on doing pretty much the same Wolfsburg Dirt Technique advertising, but by giving it a new aesthetic, I think we moved the whole thing on. So I want a definition of idea that also will accommodate aesthetic and visual equity, etc., etc. I think I remember being very struck by this because, it broke a whole load of the rules that you were trying to build up around what made a great idea. I always loved this first iPhone advertising because I think now you would say it was disintermediated in some way. It just showed you what it did. and it showed you the multiple things that it did. And it seemed to be, there wasn't an idea getting in the way, I think would be the expression people would use. People would investigate the ad because of what it did. And I think our own subsequent Google Chrome work was, in a sense, a response to that, was to say, we need to demonstrate what the product does. We mustn't let the idea get in the way. Interestingly, we often refer to this now as emotional product demonstration. It's a demo of multiple functionality in an emotion, with some sort of emotional glue. Curiously, that's how Hegarty talked about Levi's way back, was emotional product demonstration. So through my career, I guess I've encountered ideas as many different things, as the repeated dramatic motif, as the constructed narrative with the brand at the centre, as the easy-to-digest immediate joke, as the brand world that can be taken anywhere and recognised anywhere, etc., etc., as the big unifying conceptual glue that means you can do anything you like anywhere and you can extend into new categories, etc., etc., as visual equity, as something that can be owned in terms of colour and tone and style, and as emotional product demonstration. And if you ask me right here now, what is a communication idea? In many ways, it's all these things. I want a definition of an idea that accommodates all this, because I like all of these things. I want communication ideas that do all of this. I would probably say, I was very struck by something. Paul Smith came in and spoke about his own discipline, and he said, well, when I market my shirts in my shops, I really love the power of the repeated image. And I'll show a chambray shirt in blue, but then I'll put next to it a pale blue chambray shirt, and then I'll do a chambray shirt with a white collar, and then I'll do another chambray shirt close to the first one. And he said, I love the power of the repeated image. And I felt, whichever of those definitions that we've talked about earlier, I do believe a lot of what we do is build meaning through repeated expression, build meaning through constantly showing or saying or doing, etc. And I think repetition is fundamental to my understanding of the modern idea. And I think it's very odd that book, the quote you put up on the book, because I would say that the modern idea is the creation of a meaningful pattern. Brands are nothing if not aggregations of meaning. And through patterns, we can adjust that meaning and add new meaning, etc. By creating patterns, we can do that. So, inevitably, when you have a review, the questions are not, is it a good story? Is the brand in the middle of it? Is it a good joke, etc.? I think the questions we should ask now are, can you show it? Can you see it? Can you repeat it? Can you flex it? Can you own it? Can you adapt it? Can you use it? Because ultimately, we're in the business of pattern manufacture. Thank you.